You're live.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. This is the Public Health Subcommittee for the Nevada Cannabis Advisory Commission. Today, we're going to discuss some of our recommendations regarding the salad consulting petition and likely vote on moving them forward to the main Cannabis Advisory Commission. First thing we're going to do is a roll call. So I'm going to start with Member DePreet.
I'm here. Good morning.
Morning. Member Chu.
Here.
Member Nelson.
Here.
And I don't know if Member Hayes can hear us yet. No. I know she's here. She's just having technical difficulties. So hopefully we'll be able to hear from her shortly. While she's getting that figured out, let's see if there's any public comment. Is there anyone who has any public comment? You know what? I don't even, oh, there we go. I see you. If you have a public comment, please raise your hand. Okie dokie. Seeing none, I'm going to move on. Teresa, can you hear us? Nope. Zoom. Sometimes Zoom can be real pain. All right. So unless I hear screams of dissent from our friends at the CCB, I am going to just assume that we'll get Member Hayes with us as soon as possible, and we have a quorum, right? So I think we can move forward with our. Ooh. This might be Teresa.
Hello?
Hi, can you hear us?
Hello. Oh, thank God. Okay, I think I can hear you now.
Great.
Sorry.
I hate to suggest this, but if you have the possibility of also getting on Zoom so that you can see our screens, today we're going to go over a list of recommendations that we brainstormed on our last meeting. So it'll be helpful for you, especially since we didn't have you at the last meeting, to see this stuff on the screen.
All right, I'm trying that now.
Okay. I'm gonna mute you. Well, actually, you can mute yourself. Yeah, there you go. All right. Oh, look at that. It works. Hallelujah. You did it. Can you hear us now? Uh-oh. No. Can you hear us now, Teresa?
Unmute.
She is muted. There you go.
Okay, the host muted you.
I did not.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Right.
Great. Okay, wonderful. Fantastic. All right, so I think we're gonna move forward with reviewing the recommendations that we brainstormed last time. Since I'm driving, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and kick us off. All right. So can everyone see my slides all right? Yep. Okay, great. So we discussed, we split up what we were going to focus on. And so what I took on was, let's move this video panel, which is always directly in the way. There we go. I took on a couple of topics. My first one is concern about overconsumption of alcohol, particularly. In the application from SALA, they talk about polysubstance use, which, certainly we're concerned about, combined consumption of many substances, but really the main concern from my perspective, if we're thinking about like an outdoor music event in Las Vegas in the summer, it is the combined use of alcohol and cannabis, which increases the risk of overconsumption of both substances. And while, from a health perspective, overconsumption of cannabis is uncomfortable, but overconsumption of alcohol can lead to alcohol poisoning, can literally kill you. So to me, considering especially these are outdoor events where people can already get dehydrated, this to me is my number one public health concern because it actually can lead to death. So my recommendations, I'd love to hear people's feedback on this. And what I was thinking is we can discuss, we can edit, we can move through all of our recommendations, and then we can go back through and vote on them either individually or all together. I want to wait until we go through all of our recommendations because one recommendation might make us think we want to go back and tweak a different recommendation. So anyway, back to what I was talking about here. My recommendations to prevent particularly overconsumption of alcohol. So someone whose inhibitions are lowered given consumption of cannabis, and then they drink more than they would normally if they weren't high, right? For the pilot, why not just say, you know what, this is complicated enough. Let's just stick to cannabis consumption only. So just no alcohol sales. And that's really the idea behind cannabis consumption lounges not allowing alcohol. If the CCB decides, okay, we want to allow alcohol, I think the applicant needs to come back to the CCB with a science-based plan to reduce risk of overconsumption, really focusing on alcohol poisoning. So, during the first CCB meeting or Cannabis Advisory Commission meeting, a representative from SALA was like, we could do wristbands, but, people can cut off wristbands. And I was like, that's true. But there are more technological solutions like scannable wristbands with, I believe they have like RFID chips in them that could link to an app that shows your alcohol purchases. For that individual, you could say, you can only buy one beer at a time. So you don't have people going up buying like 5 beers, just stacking them up and throwing them down. You could say no wristband, no purchase, no consumption. So that people aren't cutting them off and just going, gee, I don't know what happened to it. Other ideas, you could just say, look, we're only going to sell beer and wine. We're only going to sell relatively lower alcohol, lower concentration alcohol, so that, the stuff that gets people drunk quickly is just not available for purchase. So those are my ideas for limiting overconsumption, particularly of alcohol. Are there any thoughts from the board? Okay, I'm interpreting silence as agreement. Yeah, yeah. Remember Nelson?
Hey, so I definitely agree with you here. I'm just wondering, so alcohol obviously is federally regulated, and is there any concerns with like the ability to do alcohol and cannabis at the same time, given that alcohol is regulated by the ATF?
I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm like, what? I mean, I definitely agree with you on the idea of just like keeping them separate. I'm just curious to see what the future of that could possibly be, given we're talking about like crossing federal and state lines with these sort of things. So
yeah, I honestly, I don't know. My suspicion is that I'm just going to take notes here. My suspicion is that since the problem is sales across state lines, it's not consuming two things, one that's perhaps come from outside of the state and one that's come from inside the state in the same place. Like I think it's fine. But if that's a question, are there additional barriers to selling alcohol and selling cannabis in the same event that we just don't know about? Yeah, member Chu.
Yeah, I think logistically it's a little difficult. I think even with your solution, what sounded very interesting, with a wristband with an RFID that tracks both consumption. You could still have a group of people where a subset is, using cannabis and another portion of them are just doing alcohol. And what would prevent them from the person doing alcohol from just buying drinks around the drinks for, the whole group. So
Yeah.
I think it's logistically, it's going to be very difficult to control this. And I don't know how.
Well, I'll tell you, similar to how you could only buy so much when you go into a dispensary on a day, you could say, every time you go up to purchase an alcoholic drink, you can only buy one. And there's a limit within an 8-hour period or something like that. Certainly only being able to have like one drink per person, that's pretty common. That happens all the time. Like if you go to a UNR game, you can't buy a bunch of alcohol because the idea is that you might distribute it to people who are underage, right? So, so certainly the like one drink per person rule is commonly implemented, and it's meant to stop sharing. And the cool thing about these RFID tags is that people, you could even think about like limits within a certain amount of time. That's why I put science-based on here, because like maybe it's a 12-hour or even a 24-hour event, and maybe it doesn't make sense to say, well, people can only buy 6 beers, but maybe it's like 1 beer an hour, or something like that. I think, since this is a petition, I think the applicant needs to come up with these ideas, and they can look around and figure things out. Personally, I think the easiest thing would be purchase limits at each purchase, and counter limits, and or not allowing liquor sales. And like ideally just try out cannabis first. But I do wonder, I feel like this is going to take coordination between multiple regulatory boards, and I don't know how much power CCB has to do that type of stuff. So we'll see. Member Hayes, you have a question?
Okay, well, I apologize for missing the last meeting. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
And so we thought about this in respect of our involvement in Burning Man, which is, now going to fall under the Central Nevada Health District, after July 1st, 2023. So, first of all, alcohol brings in a lot of money at temporary events. Lots of vendors will just do alcohol. So how many vendors do you have doing any one of these events? And then you'd have to have coordination between the margarita guy and the beer guy and the guy doing wine. And so we see that as, having 3 different vendors coordinate with each other and having a tag that goes, okay, you've had your limit on beer, you've had your limit on wine, you've had your limit on margaritas, is going to be a challenge. At outdoor events, would you be limiting the number of vendors? For Burning Man specifically, there's already a problem with weed and alcohol. And so allowing it, to, I don't know, come out of the shadows, so to speak. There's already the FBI there, and they are working the event the entire time that we are out there. And so when it gets to be temporary mass gatherings or things like that, I think this just becomes a regulatory nightmare for us to limit the number of alcohol vendors, because I don't have any authority to do that. If you are coming, part of my food regs is, if you're doing, canned, jarred beer, canned beer stuff, I don't even permit you. So that doesn't give me a lot of play there to limit the number of vendors so that we can also have cannabis sales. So from a regulatory standpoint, it becomes a nightmare. So, in addition, would children be allowed at any of these events? Burning Man does allow children. They don't allow dogs, but yeah, you can have a child. So now you have children at these events. And so a lot of our temporary events, they're carnivals or, you know, events where, you know, children are invited. And if you can't take a child to a cannabis, you know, dispensary, our children going to these events where this is allowed. So those are our concerns from our standpoint.
Yeah. I think Commissioner Nelson's going to talk about age of the event. So we'll touch upon that when she talks about her stuff. Yeah, I agree. I think all of this stuff is difficult, and that's why the applicant needs to come with better plans than they have right now. You know. Moving on to the next one. Clean air was the other thing I took on. So there's two dimensions of that. There's clean air for patrons of the event. So just put it on the record. Clean air should be the norm in Nevada events, indoors and outdoors, but it's not, but someday it will be, hopefully. For people who choose not to smoke, and particularly for people with pre-existing conditions like asthma, I think it is both legal and ethical to make sure that they can attend an event without concerns about smoke exposure. So we talked about this last time. I think Member Nelson suggested, let's put the consumption areas on the outskirts of the festival. Let's use wind patterns and let's use fans to keep the smoke out of the festival. If this is going to be an all ages event, though I think that we are not loving that idea in general, but if it were to be an all ages event, it should certainly be a discrete area. And then, you know, we have already standards for consumption lounges with outdoor consumption areas and how to keep that smoke from bothering and affecting neighbors. So those ideas can be applied here. Are there any comments on this? Yeah, Member Chu.
Yes, I think the one about having the outskirts of the festival, we also discussed last time about one of the proposed areas was Life is Beautiful, which is downtown. You go on the outskirts of the festival, you are right up next to the rest of the community.
Mm-hmm.
So you may be protecting within the festival, but now you're
but not outside. Yeah,
affecting it there.
Yeah.
So
and that's why I think they also need to look at to use the outdoor consumption area regulations for consumption lounges, because those regulations are supposed to limit the impact of that area on businesses and residences around that. So, you know, it might be that they need to like work in a buffer, for example. So I agree. Life is Beautiful seems particularly a difficult place to implement this, I have to say, on like multiple dimensions. So, yeah, I'm just gonna note. Any other comments? Okay. Next, to me, the main problem with clean air is for employees, because they are the ones that could be exposed to significant amounts of secondhand smoke over long periods of time. And that's where the real health harms come for a lot of people, particularly if it's a really large event. You know, they're by a tent where 100 people are smoking, that's a decent amount of smoke, even if it's outdoors. So my recommendation is that they have to come with a plan. I don't know that we can at this point tell them exactly what to do, because I think that the situation will vary depending on the nature of the outdoor event and the size of the outdoor event. So they need to come to us, or I guess I should say CCB, with a plan on how to mitigate exposure for the people who are working in the consumption area. So we had talked about, for example, separate, purchasing and consumption areas, and using fans to blow smoke away from the employees. But that design's going to depend on the nature of the event. Are there any comments on this? All right. And the last thing that I took on was just this idea that this is a pilot. So in order to know if this pilot went well, we need to know, we need to have some actual data. So the applicant should provide a plan on how they're going, like what kind of information they're going to collect and how they're going to report it to CCB. And I have a short list of potential measures here for kind of the health outcomes that I'm personally most concerned about. I think this list could be, pages long, which we probably don't want to do, but I would think this should be put together with law enforcement, for example, to just make sure we're catching the biggest stuff. So the two that I kind of gave here was how many people need medical assistance for alcohol or cannabis related reasons, and what were those reasons? How many people were caught with underage people were caught with cannabis, and was it purchased at the event, to give you an idea of, violations or sharing. Do you have any questions that kind of stick out to you right now that you also want to suggest for reporting? Or I guess I should say, how do you feel about reporting first? And then do you have any additional questions if you are into it?
Number what?
Yes, Member Hayes.
Total number of sales.
Total number of what?
Sales.
Sales?
Sales. How much pot did they sell?
Oh, sales. Thank you. Okay. Anything else? Okay. And then there were just a couple of things. This is kind of like, et cetera, things that came up during the meeting. Member Nelson, you suggested that we might actually be able to speak to the Grasslands Festival, but perhaps they should also reach out to them to see if there's any lessons learned that they can integrate into their proposal. And then we also talked about putting an end date on the pilot. It's kind of strange that there doesn't seem to be a, we'll try this many times, or it'll be possible from this date to this date or something like that. There's no end date. So we certainly don't want a never-ending pilot. Any comments on these recommendations? That's okay. We can hear you.
When does the pilot start?
It's still a proposal. There's no official start date at all. So, I mean, that's a good question.
If we have a pilot, it should be during a temporary event season or early in a temporary event season. Usually Nevada events start about April. And then after that, we get a flood of them, but not into our extremely busy season, which is August, September, and October.
And is that because you're concerned about burden?
Yeah, I think it would be easier to look at each event individually during the slower part of the season, like April, May, and June, as opposed to when we get our really large events where we are having, you know, 250,000, 500,000 people in this town at any given time. So these should be done at smaller events, you know, and not our largest, most complicated events where we already have issues.
Yeah.
You
Okay. I think Member Nelson was the next one with the hand up.
So with regard to an end date on the pilot, I feel like an end date might be kind of a weird way to approach this. What if it was a limited amount of pilot licenses? So
Yeah.
the pilot program launched with 10 licenses over the course of 1 year, and that allows the CCB to not only like practice with distributing these temporary licenses, but also too, I think it gives them a little bit of control and limitations on who is getting a license. And so it's just not like a free for all.
Yeah, I think that kind of makes more sense. I agree. Commissioner, Member Dupree. Hi.
Hi, yeah, so I just wanted to piggyback off of Member Hayes' comments, and just something that I have to remind myself is that this isn't for my regulatory authority to regulate. So SNHD is not going to be regulating these recommendations if they come to be. So just a reminder, unless you have some kind of relationship with the Department of Taxation where you're covering some of this, what I'm envisioning happening is SNHD will show up at Life is Beautiful, regulate what we currently regulate, the food, the sanitation, that sort of thing, and then walk right past the cannabis section, if there is a cannabis section, because that's not in our regulations or under our jurisdiction to regulate. So if that's helpful for you as you're kind of looking through these recommendations, it's not necessarily falling on the health departments.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Any other? Oh, Member Nelson.
So my question, I guess this is directed to Lauren and Teresa. So given that there's not going to be any crossover with the health departments and the CCB on this, what does that mean for the amenities within a cannabis consumption lounge, or not a lounge, but like if there's a sector of a festival and like there are bathrooms within that area, or if there are other things that might kind of be a weird crossover, like is that going to just be like a point blank, like the health districts aren't touching it?
Member Dupree. Yeah.
So I think that's for us to I think those details need to be figured out. The way I have a couple ideas in my slides, so maybe we can revisit that, because SNHG does usually do bathrooms and things like that. And so I have a couple ideas. So maybe bring that question up when I go through my slides, and we'll see if we get to some recommendations for it.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, Member Hayes.
We do have an event coordinator permit. So we are working with the event coordinators from the beginning to the end of the event. Mm-hmm. So whatever is happening at that event, whether or not it's a food establishment or the bathrooms or the trash or the anything, we are involved in it. Even if we are not directly regulating that, it affects what goes on at that event. And my concern for staff safety. We are at those events. We are at the events for, considerable amounts of time, and having that kind of thing at large events would be difficult, which is why I recommend, if you're going to pilot this, do it during an early part of the season where we are having smaller events and not, gargantuan events.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think we should move on. So I'm going to close that. Ooh, actually, we should not close that. Stop. I'm going to share. And who wants to take the next one?
maybe I should go next since we kind of are touching on some of those things.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So my perspective is on preventing outbreaks in these scenarios, preventing communicable illness. So anytime we're bringing food or vapes or pre-rolls or anything to the mouth, that's a way that we can introduce pathogens like norovirus, which is your run-of-the-mill stomach bug. It's also what super contagious, happens on cruise ships, that sort of thing, among other pathogens. But this is kind of what I'm keeping in mind as I'm thinking about these events. And so for me, what I would want to focus on to prevent the transmission of things like norovirus or other communicable illnesses at an event is soiled hands, ill workers, ill members of the public, and improper handling in preparation, storage, or service of the cannabis products. So in the goal of preventing illness or illness transmission, kind of the biggest catch-all is the prevention of contamination or product during storage, prep, or service. I would strongly recommend restricting product at temporary events to be pre-made, pre-packaged, non-TCS items. TCS items are things that need refrigeration, like your cooked veggies, meat, dairy, that sort of thing. So that would mean everything gets made and packaged at the dispensary, and then it's just transported. Everything is protected from contamination during transport, storage at the event, and sale. If they do decide to allow infused TCS foods, require that they follow food safety protocols set out in FDA food code. If they allow open product at all, require some kind of sneeze guard protection or barrier from the public so that a member of the public can't touch everything, sneeze on everything, that sort of thing. Require that all product comes from an approved source and is transported in a sanitary manner directly to the event. I think that's kind of understood, but I would just like it to be explicit. Require that product is stored at the event in sanitary containers 6 inches or more off the ground. At special events, we see a lot of times people want to store food on the ground or store food contact items like cups and plates on the ground. So just make it clear about that to prevent contamination. And then require that there are hand wash stations either at each booth or accessible within 15 feet for vendor use. If your vendor has to sneeze into their hand, they can go wash their hands and come back before they touch the product and hand it to you. And then prioritize employee health of staff. So that would mean, for example, using a symptom screening questionnaire, checking everyone that they don't have any symptoms before they start their shift, being explicit about excluding staff who are experiencing symptoms, and tracking employee illness with a log. So these are my ideas for just like general prevention of contamination at the event. Are there any comments or suggestions on these recommendations or ideas? Okay, I will, go ahead, Member Hayes.
These are all, generic, everyday food safety events. But I will share, we had a norovirus outbreak at Burning Man last year based on sharing. And, pot is shared, hand-to-mouth contact. And in this particular case, it was alcohol sharing through a cup. And so, some sort of messaging, I think, would be necessary to remind people that sharing cups, sharing liquor, sharing beer cups, sharing a joint between people, could transfer things like norovirus, especially things with short incubation periods, and maybe just messaging that would go a long way.
Thank you. Okay, next one, ensuring operational plans are enacted on site. I strongly recommend that there are on-site inspections. That was not included in the proposal. You can write a beautiful plan. That doesn't mean it will be enacted on site. So I would not recommend any version of this proposal without on-site inspections. And those are to make sure that the plans are being adhered to, sanitation rules are being followed at the event. So I would want that included. Any questions or concerns there? Recommendations? Okay. And then we talked about this a little bit last time, is ensuring vendor needs are provided for. So here I'm just recommending that cannabis kind of echoes what SNHD does, and I'm sure up north as well, in that there has to be a method to ensure that vendors have what they need at the event. And, some of these might be required by other agencies, so there might be some logistics to work out. But I would recommend that they require an event coordinator as well. And it may be the same event coordinator as it is for the food or for others, but that in addition to handing out permits for the additional vendors, there be a permit for the event coordinator. And that way, if the power goes out, for example, the event coordinator is known to be the point of contact, and they're responsible for finding a solution and articulating that to their vendors. If the inspectors during the on-site inspection observe some issues with sanitation or food safety or cannabis safety, that the event coordinator is responsible for following up and making sure those corrections remain in place. What we find a lot of times is that they correct it while the inspector's looking, inspector walks away, it gets really busy, things fall apart again. So it's up to the event coordinator to maintain the same level of sanitation. And then, the event coordinator permit may require an inspection. That's how we do it as well, to confirm that they have the infrastructure needed and that the proper practices are being followed. So this might have some redundancies, like Member Hayes was talking about. This is something that health departments usually already do. They check the bathrooms, they check to make sure water is provided and disposed of properly. They check the trash. So this event coordinator might have two similar inspections from two different agencies. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing if it means that they can provide the cannabis properly, or it's a conversation for, if the agencies are going to be, sharing these responsibilities, or, if they need the health department to step in some way. But historically, I don't think that's been a desire, and also not for us to figure out. This is for the petitioners to figure out. But I would strongly recommend a event coordinator position that is provided by the event, so that there's a point of contact and follow up on the things that the vendors need to do their sales safely. Ideas, questions, comments on this one? Member Nelson?
So just to clarify, this is essentially providing some space where there's going to be an overlap with the health districts and an overlap with the CCB regulations, correct?
Potentially, yeah.
So I do obviously see that it's a good thing. I mean, obviously, like, a lot of corners get cut when things get busy. I am just concerned of how this would pan out in actuality, when you say, like, they have a CCB inspector come in, and then 15 minutes later a health department inspector comes in. And in our experience with the production license in cannabis, sometimes inspectors have different interpretations of things, and we kind of do get conflicting information. So I'm wondering if this overlap might be a little excessive, and it may be best to just give one agency authority over the other when it comes to, like, the things with regard to the health aspects of it.
Okay, so maybe I should have clarified. That's a good point. What I'm envisioning is not necessarily the same things being inspected twice, but that Cannabis Department of Taxation echoes are set up for checking these things. So there's going to be a cannabis imprint within the special event. Is that right? Like, it's not going to be cannabis everywhere. There's going to be a cannabis imprint. And then my idea is that SNHD does SNHD stuff outside of the cannabis imprint. SNHD doesn't walk into the cannabis imprint, but somebody needs to go into that cannabis imprint and make sure that they do have restrooms, that they do have hand washing, that they do have power, that they do have water. And so for Department of Taxation to do the things that we do outside the cannabis imprint inside the cannabis imprint. So not necessarily 2 inspections from 2 different agencies at the same thing, but making sure that the same things are being checked just outside the imprint and inside the imprint. And it may be the same event coordinator who's responsible on both sides. It may, you don't need a separate person providing water inside the imprint and outside the imprint. It could be the same person, but they would be talking to 2 different agencies, depending on if they're inside the imprint and outside the imprint.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for explaining it.
I think, Member Dupree, if you could just, I'm going to ask you guys for all your slides afterwards. If you could clarify that on the slide, then that'll be helpful so that we don't get that same question at a higher level. Thanks. All right. Anything else we want to talk about on these topics?
Those are all of my slides.
All right, thank you. Let's move on. Who wants to go next? Okay, number 2, let's do this.
Sure. Okay, can you see this?
Yes.
So, yeah. So the points I had was, first one was the dispensary versus the consumption lounge. The proposal requested sales and consumption outdoor events. It discussed a cannabis sales facility. So by definition, this is a dispensary, not a consumption lounge. And then they copied the requirement for a consumption lounge into the proposal. And the consultant at the meeting indicated this was drafted before before consumption lounges were approved, and so that's why they did it that way. I do have some concerns that the skills and training for a dispensary employee, while very similar to a consumption lounge employee, there are some significant differences, including the amount that is allowed to be sold. You are dealing with prepared food and food handling, and this is a question for the Southern Valley Health District. I was trying to look at the website, figure out if this is required, but do temporary, pop-up events need a food handler health card for the employees working there? We did discuss with Commissioner Dupree, these would be prepackaged items. But as we discussed with the consumption lounge, there are things like, 800 milligram candy bar, that you might break up, to serve individual portions of this. At what point does this cross over, and are those going to be banned, or even allow things like that to happen, in which case you would need a food handler health card or not. But the other thing that consumption lounges would be doing would be monitoring consumers. So making sure it conforms with the health policy, overconsumption, sexual assault, impaired driver risk mitigation, and all of that. And then, prevention of product from leaving the establishment, and prevention of distribution outside of the venue in large crowds. So the current proposal was a pilot, and which would mean that an establishment may only be participating in a very few events, perhaps once per year. And so now we're talking about employee training. If this is a dispensary employee who are doing daily dispensary duties, and then they're asked to work at essentially as a consumption lounge for a couple of days once a year, there is potential for unintentional but significant errors. And then the penalties would be then leveled against the dispensary. So there's a very large risk involved with this, if this is for a dispensary license. I'm going to have my recommendations towards the end of this, and I can jump down here. Recommendation 1 is, consider this should be tied to consumption lounge instead of a dispensary to minimize mistakes to impact both the community and the establishment. Any questions or comments about this recommendation? Okay. Sorry, I'm jumping around. Here, so the proposal stated that the distance from prohibited locations is based on the edge of the events. So it's 1,500 feet from a casino, 1,000 feet from a school, 300 feet from the facility. The sponsor who puts on EDC suggests the EDC or Life is Beautiful is meant to meet the size requirement. So in addition, they put in a minimum size requirement. So very, very large events. EDC is located in Las Vegas Motor Speedway, so that's not an issue for how to deal with this location. But Life is Beautiful is located downtown. And according to their website, it goes from 7th Street to 11th Street and from Mesquite to Carson. Well, yeah, as we talked about last time, the El Cortez Casino is within this event. Mountain View Christian School is 650 feet away from there. If this event were ever to increase in size, it would bring a range of other schools. Nevada State High School is maybe another block away from there. And then, so even if the event occurs on days school is not in session, there may be some programs that use the facilities in the off hours. So sports, performances, any special programs, a lot of those things do happen on weekends. So you have that public there. If this were to be adjusted, as we've been discussing, for smaller venues, a lot of these happen at public parks. So Craig Ranch, Sunset Park, Floydland Park. These are all situated in neighborhoods that have schools nearby, and a lot of them are directly across the street from the edge of the park. And then within that also there was, are public parks considered to be community centers, or do many of them contain community centers? And if so, that would automatically exclude them from these venues. And so part of my proposal is just it may make more sense to determine the distance from the location of the cannabis area, not the edge of the events. Otherwise, it could be very difficult to, get anything to actually comply, with this. So as written, the size and distance restrictions only EDC would qualify for this. Life is Beautiful. If you adjust it from the consumption area, not the edge of the event, it might qualify. Burning Man, as was discussed, the main meeting as well. It just wouldn't work for Burning Man. And then as that smaller venues often situated in neighborhood parks, which are close to schools or community centers inside the park. So recommendation 2 is just to examine the size, location, distance requirements. Otherwise, may only unintentionally benefit only a few selected venues and exclude many others. So any comments on this?
Yeah, I have a comment that we discussed at the last meeting, and that is that we talked about events that are located in neighborhoods, downtown areas, etc. It's really difficult to imagine how they're going to figure out how to deal with advertising of the cannabis consumption lounge. So, is it like from if the consumption lounge is on the interior, then like if they put an advertisement on the exterior, how does that work? It's just, to me, it would make sense to just say no advertising of the temporary consumption lounge facing the outside. I think that would be the easiest thing to do. Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Dupree.
I agree with your recommendation. I think I would just make it a little bit more clear what direction is, like make it instead of just examine size and location, I think I would say, consider allowing smaller events to participate, or, just make it a little more clear as our message gets moved along the chain, that it doesn't get lost the intent.
All right. Commissioner Nelson.
I just wanted to express my support of a lot of your points. Kind of how things are written in the petition, only one event in our entire state, from what I'm putting together, is going to be able to do this, whether it be because of the age requirements, the size requirements, or the distance from the schools, care centers, all the other fun stuff. So yeah, I do think that we probably need to recommend a little bit more flexibility here in order to include smaller events and also allow these events to happen throughout the whole state and not just in one specific speedway.
Okay. Anything else? That's it. All right. The Wi-Fi other internet access that Commissioner Dupree covered this on hers. So the just it requires tracking sales properly in metric and determine some policy of the Wi-Fi or other connection drops as to, are you going to allow sales to continue and just enter it later, things like that. So again, this is the same as Commissioner Dupree, so I'm not going to do that one. And this is something that just sort of popped in my mind this week, which was, can a dispensary or consumption lounge legally transport product from their facility to the temporary events, or does this require a distribution license? So that is a question that's out there, because technically only a distributor can actually move products, and a lab if you're moving to a lab. But if you're going to go from one facility to the other, even though you can say technically it's the same facility, it's a different location. And so there's got to be security requirements for that, the logistics of that, how do you, deal with security on this one? If you're going, even with that, life is beautiful, I keep bringing that one up, but can you park that close to where your booth is going to be? And then how do you transport, a extremely expensive products, from wherever you parked, into where you need to get to. So there's some logistics with that needs to be considered. So my final recommendation was transportation issues, who can transport it, really meaning what license is required, or you make an exception for, the dispensary or the consumption lounge. How do you log this into metric, and how do you return unused product to inventory? Are you going to allow it? If it's, I've assumed something that is shelf stable, but sitting out in 110-degree weather, are you going to allow that to go back into your inventory? Or once you've transported this, is that it? You have to destroy, whatever's there. Or are you going to say, well, it's fine, they kept it, in a somewhat temperature controlled environment at, it never got above like 80 degrees, it's probably fine. So that's just something to consider what they want to do with this. So any comments on this one? Okay, I think that was my last one.
Right, thank you. All right, Member Nelson, your turn.
All right. Sorry guys, I do kind of struggle with screen sharing, so if I mess this up, I apologize in advance. All right, can you guys see my screen? Yes, okay, cool. All right, so my sections that I kind of was diving into were regards to age restrictions and also to the event capacities, which were two things that were proposed in the petition. So I did a lot of research on other consumption events that have been happening in other states. And I know that I talked about grasslands before, so I dove into it a little bit deeper. So grasslands it's an activation that is part of the Outside Lands Music Festival that happens in San Francisco. The festival is it's hosted at Golden Gate Park. And I think that this actually is a really good model for a lot of the things that we have been discussing today. So I took a screenshot here from the Outside Lands Grasslands website. And the interesting thing is it is a licensed event. They did have to post the license number here at the bottom of the screen. It originally did start as an education event only. It's been going on for a couple of years now, but it has evolved into an active consumption event. So if I can pull up my next screen. So the events are licensed similar to what we're looking at doing in Nevada. Interestingly enough, Outside Lands is an all ages festival, and the Grassland pop-up is 21 plus only. So how they do it over there is that obviously the festival can be all ages, which I think is similar to the situation for Life is Beautiful and for Burning Man right now. They don't have age restrictions on attendees in general. However, the area of cannabis consumption and distribution is 21 plus only. It's very clear to that. And I got an image of the footprint of Outside Lounge that I kind of wanted to share with you guys. So here is what they have done. I think this was their 2021 activation, or maybe the 2022 one, I'm not 100% sure. But over here on the bottom side of the polo field is where they have like their main stage and everything. The Grasslands activation is on the outside of the festival. And I will kind of zoom in on that a little bit better so you guys can see it more clearly. But to get to that area, it is isolated. It's not in view of the rest of the festival. It's on the outskirts, so there's minimal smoke overblow into the general areas. It's age gated. And an interesting thing that I saw was that they had a long pathway to get into it. So it made it very difficult for anybody who's not supposed to be there to get into the festival. So I just thought that that was something that was worth considering. So I know I'm kind of going kind of fast, but efficiency is important to me. So the recommendations that I was looking into was that I think that putting the age limit of the event in general being 18 plus, I think is kind of, it's kind of odd. It doesn't really make sense. Like the consumption area itself is supposed to be 21 plus, but either we need to have the event in total be 21 plus, or an event doesn't need to have a general age gate, but the consumption area needs to be 21 plus. Again, kind of looking into it, Life is Beautiful and Burning Man both don't have age limitations. So like EDC does, and how this is currently written, it's only going to allow EDC to have consumption permits. The last part of my research was showing that, or was looking into the event minimum attendance. I'm not really seeing much benefit to this. And I tried to do some research on like, okay, would a big event be better to launch with? But I was failing to find anything that shows actual, positive benefit to it. Large events obviously are a lot more complicated to regulate. They're a lot more complicated to inspect. So I would suggest that we recommend to just remove the 25,000 person minimum. This would allow for smaller events to initiate in the pilot. And also too, I think it would be much easier for from a health and safety perspective, it would be much easier for these events to get up and off the ground. They could be inspected a lot more efficiently, and it would just allow things to go a little bit more smoother before graduating up to large scale events where you've got 50,000 people in play. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, cool.
I just wanted to say that that's really helpful, that picture of how to envision how this would work. That's super helpful personally to me. I like a lot of my concerns would be alleviated with this type of approach. And the fact that it's not, there's no other, it's in the middle of a park, there's a huge buffer around the outside. There's really controlled access. It seems like a great idea.
Yeah, I think that they've done a very good job in their event setup, and being able to, have this example of something that has successfully been ran in other states. I was trying to look into other details. I tried to reach out to Another Planet, which is the event host for Outside Lands, but I was having a hard time getting in touch with someone. But on this page here, I did find some resources specifically from the Bureau of Cannabis Control in California on the event licensees that they dole out, and then also to just some general guides of what these event permits require. So it seems like things are running pretty well over there. Obviously, it's not perfect, and I'm sure Nevada could do better, but specifically with grasslands, I think this is something that we could learn a lot from.
Yeah, I agree. Any other comments on that? All right. Okay, so what I propose we do next is, I think probably first we should talk about our feelings about the petition overall. And just hold a vote as to whether or not we recommend it to move forward or not. We kind of informally took this poll at the last meeting, but we need to officially vote on that. Yeah, Member Hayes.
My question is, have we reached out to the county public health officers about this plan yet? And have we reached out to county commissioners?
We have not, but since this is a proposal, this is a petition to the CCB, it's not, like it's not gonna, we're supposed to give feedback on it, but we're not writing regulations at this point. So, you know, I think my feeling is we have so many questions about the petition that just, I don't think we need to, the petitioner needs to do a better job of putting together how they're going to, how they're going to do this. And the petitioner could reach out to those entities to figure out what they need. But since they are petitioning the CCB to change regulations and allow them to move forward, we don't need to do their homework for them. They need to do their homework and come with a proposal that works. And then we will give them feedback on it. It's kind of like how I treat my students. I'm like, I'm not going to write the paper for you. I'm going to give you feedback on the paper. And I'm going to suggest ways for you to make it better. But like ultimately it is up to you to write the paper well. So yeah, perhaps this is my professor side coming out. Work for you. So how do we feel about holding just a general vote about, do we recommend this to move forward or not?
As written. Yeah, okay.
As proposed, do we think this petition is ready for prime time? Okay. If you think the petition is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
How do we vote?
So if we think the petition is ready to move forward, raise your hand if you think the petition is good to go and ready to move forward.
I'd recommend getting it verbally on the record, not just a
verbally on the
hand.
record. Okay, thank you. Say aye, please, if you think the petition is ready to move forward. Okay, no one said aye. Say, I guess nay, no. If you, I'll just actually ask everybody. Member Hayes, yes or no? Do you think the petition is ready to move forward? That makes more sense.
No.
No, okay. Member Dupree.
No.
Member Nelson.
No.
Member Chu.
No.
And I also agree, no. Okay, so we do not recommend this to move forward. Okay, fantastic. Now let's go back to our recommendations. So we need to put together a set of recommendations. We need to give them to the Cannabis Advisory Commission, which will then forward it to the CCB saying, here are some things, here's how the student could improve their work. So the first thing I want to go to, I'm just going to share my screen. Maybe. See, everyone's having good issues today. Sure. All right. So first I want to move into this set of recommendations. So just to remind everybody, this was about polysubstance use, clean air, reporting, and then just a couple other recommendations, which really, Member Nelson's section really went much more deeply into grasslands. So I might even say, I'll get rid of this because of the amount of the depth that you went into for grasslands. Is that okay with everybody? Because, yeah. Okay, so the first question I have for all of us is, does anyone object to voting on these as a set of recommendations rather than voting on them individually? Okay, so I'm going to ask for your vote on whether or not we can move these recommendations forward to the Cannabis Advisory Commission. Member Chu?
Yes.
Member DePreet?
Yes.
Member Nelson?
Yes.
Member Hayes?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. So we are going to move forward with this set of recommendations. Stop my, oop, I see it. I see the Q&A. I'm gonna address that Q&A at the end of the voting. Moving on to Member DePreet's.
So I, of course, need to make those clarifying statements and include the notes from our conversation. But with those clarifications and additions and notes, then I guess I would ask, do you agree to move this set of recommendations forward?
I think I might have to run that.
Oh yeah, okay, great, perfect.
I'm not sure, but so yeah, the preventing illness transmission and what were the other ones? The last one?
They all fall under that goal.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yes, agreed. Let's not have people get sick. Yes or no, do you agree with recommending these to the Cannabis Advisory Commission with the edits that Member DePreet mentioned as you were giving her feedback? Member Chu?
Yes.
Member DePreet? Yes.
Yes.
Member Nelson?
Yes.
Member Hayes?
Yes.
And I also do. Okay. Thank you. Next, Member Chu.
All right. So recommendation 1 was considering whether or not it would be a consumption lounge versus dispensary. 2 was the size, distance, location requirements, and the advertisements facing outside of the events. 3 was kind of under Member DePreet. So if you want me to delete this one so it's not duplicated, I can do that.
Okay.
I don't have a problem with that. So that makes this one recommendation number 4.
Yeah, let's do that since the Wi-Fi has already been covered. Yeah.
Go there. All right.
Go.
And then the last one was the really just understanding what the transportation, how are you going to do this and what are you going to allow for this? So I think that's a big question that's not there. So,
right.
All
right. So I'm going to go ahead and ask folks. Oh, yes.
Can we just add one more thing?
Sure.
So many of our events are multi-day. How do they intend to keep it on site overnight?
Oh, good question.
It's a very good question.
Yeah.
So I put down here.
And I see your hand, Member Nelson.
Teresa's comment kind of piqued my interest because is there currently anything, can anyone recall if there's anything in the current proposal about requiring refrigeration of products? Because Ben was making a comment earlier about like, yeah, if it's 100 degrees outside, like, are you really going to want to return those edibles back to or those products back to a dispensary? So it may be worth recommending that products are stored in a temperature controlled environment if it's not already in there.
Just opening it. No, it's not it. I mean, I think that's worth just including, and if it's already in there, that's fine. The duration. I've got a bunch of stuff now. Member deplete.
So I would just, on that last bullet that you added, I would say overnight at the end. And then I would change your heading to consider transportation and storage issues, because now we're including storage in there. So just tiny little edits. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so now we've added temperature control, overnight storage, and removed the Wi-Fi recommendation since that overlapped with another set of recommendations. I'm gonna Member Hayes, do you have another comment?
Yes, but I'm going to let Sharon Bloomer. Sharon Bloomer is our environmental health specialist for here, and I thought it would be beneficial for her to sit in on this. So I'm going to let her talk.
Hi team, I'm Sharon. So I didn't see anything over the last packet about enforcement issues related. So what happens during an inspection? What if, product needs to be destroyed? What if the venue needs to close? What are there going to be citations? How is that going to be monitored? Or what's the vision for the pilot? What's the how are they going to enforce?
Right. So what we're saying is when they don't pass an inspection, what happens at the end? Are they at home? Or are they given time to correct their deficiencies before moving forward?
I don't know if that's in the CCD's other regulations, but that should be something that would be discussed, right? Is what level of enforcement is going to be taken.
Right. I think Member Chu, do you want to put that in your recommendations somewhere?
Sure, I can add one here. So we'll say what?
Compliance and enforcement.
Consequences. Does that work?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
The dispensary has, they're regulated, something happens, they're on site, they can make corrections, but at temporary events, it gets a little bit more complicated. So what does that look like?
Anything besides, have captured everything in here, or do you need more?
I just want to make sure we're not running afoul of public meeting rules here by having a person who's not on the
Right.
committee
I can
during not public comment. Are we okay, Sarah?
That would be a better question for Joel.
Okay, or Joel.
All right, so in terms of public comment, you can take public comment before and after. That's the recommendation. You don't have to take it during the deliberation and discussion, but you cannot take action on public comment or any recommendations or suggestions therein, because it has to be agendized as an actionable agenda item.
Okay.
Before you actually take comment or vote on anything that's offered by public comment, but you can take it into consideration. You can write it down, make it part of the record, and then put it on the agenda to vote for at the next committee meeting or the next subcommittee meeting.
Okay, but perhaps if Member Hayes suggested this, then we could go forward with voting on
So
it.
I'm suggesting, enforcement, corrective actions. So I would say how much time you give for corrective actions and and approval of those corrective actions.
Sorry, before approval was, what did you say?
approval of corrective actions taken on site.
Right.
And I think that's good.
If needed.
Okay. And Member Dupree, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think I would just add revocation of permit as needed. Like, when do we send somebody home? How many times can they mess up before they're not allowed to play anymore? Sort of thing. So, however you want to word that, but for us, it's revocation of permit. You could also say, like, I don't know, sending someone home, or I don't know. Yeah, great.
Permit suspension.
Like grounds for immediate revocation of a permit.
Due
It's
to
on the food side.
non-compliance.
Specific things we can close for.
So be enough?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so the 4 ones here are consumption
Let
hours.
me ask one quick question. I'm sorry to interrupt, Member Chu. But if you're going to be, are the licenses for the temporary events connected to the dispensary license or the cannabis lounge, consumption lounge license? And what would any action taken against the license in the temporary event, would that have any effect on their permanent license or their lounge and dispensary license?
I believe that was in the proposal as written, was that they had it tied to the dispensary license, and they said any violations would go against the dispensary. So I think they already addressed that, I believe, in the proposal. From my understanding of when I read it.
So then you might want to consider some type of appeal process. If I'm a dispensary owner and one of my employees messes up at the festival, I might want to appeal that, or so that might, find some way of protecting my own license from whatever happens at the event.
Oh yeah, and to clarify, I was suggesting revocation of the temporary permit, not revocation or suspension of the permanent permit.
Right, but that might be tied to the like, let's say I go back to renew my permit next year for my cannabis dispensary, but I have 2 or 3 hits from, a temporary event that's still on it. That might have some effect on whether or not the commission wants to renew my license.
All right. All kinds of more information here. All right. Do we have any more comments on Member Chu's recommendations? All right. And I just want to make absolutely sure we're okay. That recommendation 4, Member Hayes, if this is something that you are thinking of, but you thought it better for your colleague to state it.
Right. These are all from the state health department. This is from DPVH. These concerns, because it's not like we closed anybody. We do, and we have to think that, as anything that's lovely.
Okie dokie. All right, so I'm gonna go through and ask folks to give me your vote. Member Dupree, do you vote to move these recommendations forward to the Cannabis Advisory Commission?
Yes.
Member Nelson?
Yes.
Member Hayes? Sorry, Member Hayes, I didn't hear you.
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. I also say yes. and member Chu?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great, thank you. All right, I would appreciate it if each of you sent me your slides so that I can just put them together into one document for the advisory commission. I saw a question in Q&A. I'm not sure is it appropriate that I answer the Q&A question now? Is that okay? Legal people?
That's a great question. So I guess this question is, I guess this would be considered public comment.
Yeah.
So you're not really supposed to answer, respond to public comment questions like this. But what we can say is that whatever's spoken about on the record is part of the public record, and these recommendations will have to be voted on at an open meeting by the CCB. So they'll be made part of the public record at that meeting. So at some point in time, without specifically addressing the question, they will be
all right.
Presented to the public for, before the vote.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So agenda item 3, future meeting topics.
Don't we have to vote on mine?
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot.
It's okay. It's okay.
All right. Member Nelson. Thank you for that reminder.
Of course. No problem. All right. So, yeah, my recommendations were just either removing or redefining the age minimum and removing the event minimum daily attendance requirement. So there is none.
Yep. And could you also add a recommendation that that either the applicant and or the CCB use events that have already gone off successfully, such as grasslands, as a model? Or that they do, fact finding or, something, the exact wording, you can tweet, but it seems silly to pretend like no one's ever done this before.
I hate to jump in one more time. Let me just ask a practical question about the areas that are going to be, I guess, segregated for cannabis consumption purposes. Has anyone given any thought to actually making sure that there's some view of whatever concert stage or show stage is going to be going on from that, from that segregated area? Because if I'm paying all this money to see a show and I want to go smoke a joint, I'd still want to see the show.
I think that is up to the event organizers and not the regulators to figure out.
Okay.
I would agree with Jennifer. My thought would be that if a entire event is permitted as a cannabis consumption event, then yeah, like they could have a stage in it. Grasslands themselves actually has a stage where they have exclusive shows just for that area of the venue. But I do believe that in the proposal, there is language to prevent direct view of an all ages or an 18+ festival event. There is limitations that people can't see in. So I would assume that would obviously obstruct the view of people being able to see out.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and ask everybody about their vote for this set of recommendations. Do you vote? How do you vote to move forward the set of recommendations? Do you vote to move forward the set of recommendations to the Cannabis Advisory Commission? Member DePreet?
Yes.
Member Chu?
Yes.
Member Hayes?
Yes.
I also do. And Member Nelson?
I do.
Great. Okay, we did it. Thank you. So the next topic is future meetings. I don't think we need to plan anything right now because I think we've achieved our purpose. So I'm going to put together these recommendations, forward them in one document, forward them to the advisory commission, and then I'm sure we will hear from the overall advisory commission about what the next steps are.
Jennifer, do we send our slides to you directly or do we have to send them to Sarah?
Probably to Sarah. Okay. What I would guess. Okay, I'm gonna open it up for public comment. If you have any public comment, please raise your hand. Oops, that's me raising my hand. That's how you do it. Okay. All right, great. I see public comment from Mr. Graininger. Sorry if I killed your last name. Go ahead and take the mic. I guess actually I probably have to allow you to talk. There we go. Now you're allowed to talk.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, just say thanks again. Wonderful historic work you're doing. And I wanted to point out that in following along with these meetings and the safety process so far, and being a man of science, the numbers that exist to be looked at all are the ones basic with alcohol consumption, overconsumption with other substances. Those are the only numbers that really exist to look at to say there's a safety issue. And I appreciate the conclusion you're coming with, which I would recommend as well, which is a smaller event would provide less of a safety risk. If you're looking at figuring out how this is going to work, doing it with less people is less risk, even so much as air quality control for employees, or even managing the other things under discussion. So I just want to say I agree, and it's a good idea that it should be left to a smaller pilot understanding of what we're doing to figure it out instead of a huge number. And I also think that pilots should provide a greater scope at the end, providing a direction to move forward and saying, well, this worked and we're staking this claim. But as we're aiming towards smaller venues anyway, not as big an issue. And thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Do we have any more public comment? Okay. Seeing none, I think we are good to adjourn. Thank you, everybody, for your time and effort on this project. And please do send your slides to Sarah, and I'll get those recommendations to the Campus Advisory Commission. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good rest of your
Thanks,
day.
everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
All right.